Lord, you are my Lord. We cast out demons in your name. We did mighty miracles in your name. We saw healings in your name. And does anyone remember Jesus' response to these people? I don't know your name. Depart from me. I don't know who you are. And that really throws us off. Because when we hear stories like that, we're like, how can we follow Jesus and be so off kilter that we get to the day of judgment and God would be like, who are you? You know my name, but who are you? You didn't follow me. The people Jude is writing to is the example of how we can put Jesus' name on things, how we can prophesy about all kinds of things, how we can do supernatural works, and yet so deeply miss the point that we might incur judgment on ourselves, not just a little bit, but to the full extent. If you've seen the intro to Spider-Man 2, Miles Morales, they keep trying to introduce you to new characters, but they know you're tired of hearing the Spider-Man origin story over and over again for the last 40 years. So they're like, let's do this one more time, which is how I feel when I start preaching on a book like Jude, because I'm like, remember what we talked about for the last few weeks? Let's do this one more time. But nonetheless, we got to do it. Sorry. So if you've been tracking with us, the book of Jude is written by someone that we think might have been Jesus' brother, his actual flesh brother. He had a few of them, brothers and sisters. And there's some tradition throughout history where some scholars are like, we think this is one of them. But Jude is writing to a church that is off kilter. And it seems that maybe some of Paul's theology has gone to their heads. James, in his book, seemed to have to address this too. It's gone to their heads in a off-putting way, in which they essentially end up in a belief known as Antinominanism. Can you say Antinominanism? All right, Dora the Explorer has more luck than that. Getting her repeats, that's cool. Antinominanism. It's this idea that you are so free from the law that you can do whatever you want. You can't even sin. You just, however you live your life is how you live your life. And that's what Jesus freed you to. That clashes hard with the Bible. But if you read Paul the wrong way, you might end up there. Admittedly, when I was a kid reading Paul, I ended up there several times because I'm like, he says I can't even, what does he say? I'm so confused. But this church, their leaders seem to be on that boat. And they've gotten to this point of antinomianism where they think they could do whatever they want and it's not sin and you can get away with it and nothing can go wrong and have fun, do whatever you want in any way. They've gotten so far down that rabbit trail that the news has gotten back to Jude and now he's calling them out on it, trying to help them understand that they have become heretics and that they need to turn their life around. And he writes a short letter trying to convict them of where they're at, because if they keep going down this path, they're going to find themselves on the wrong side of judgment when the day of judgment comes. And one of the things that we noticed last time we talked about Jude is that they had an interesting error that they made. They were kind of against a certain kind of being. Does anybody remember what it was in Jude? The angels. We don't know a lot of what made their theology weird, but we know that they were living how they wanted and they despised the angels. And once we kind of stepped back, as we went through a list of what angels do, if you remember, we were writing it up here, angels are very connected to the law. They're the police of heaven. They're the spies of God's kingdom. They're the lawyers and attorneys for people when they're committing sin. They work with God to sort out how to bring about his will on the earth. So if you are a church who's dissing the angels and that you think they're dumb and getting in your way and whatnot, and your church is also wanting to live however you want, then it's possible that this church that Jude is writing to doesn't like angels because they're connected to the law and they don't like the law because they've gone really far off script with what Paul meant to say, right? Okay, so in today's verses, Jude 11 through 13, it's a continuation of him trying to call these leaders to account. And he gives a whole lot of biblical stories and then analogies to try to get their attention of how far they're off. He says, woe to them, these leaders, for they walked in the ways of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain. Nice rhyme. To Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion. 3 different stories that he brings up. Cain. Cain is kind of, in some Jewish thinking, and it's possible Jude is drawing off this, we're not sure. Cain is kind of the original heretic. He's the first one to decide, Adam and Eve, they do what they're not supposed to do, but Cain straight up decides that justice is like better done his way in his own hands. He doesn't agree with what God has told him. He's not like siding necessarily with another tempter, though, the Bible does say that sin is ready to crouch and jump on him, so he is partnering with that. But Cain is the one who changes his mind to a different way. God might have his own way of doing things, his own form of justice, his own way of looking at the world. I don't really like the way he's treating my brother Abel over the way he's treating me, and I've decided I'm going to kind of partner with this thing, this sin that's crouching for me, and I'm going to do things its way. And so Cain is kind of the first person to really head off into a heretical direction and invite people along with him. Because through his line, we're not going to see the greatest things happening throughout the biblical story. He's kind of an offshoot of where we're supposed to be going. The next story we have is a little lesser known, but maybe you remember a story in the Bible where God talks through a donkey. Anybody remember that? Yeah, Balaam. He shows up in the New Testament 2 or 3 times in both this passage and Revelation. The story of Balaam's a weird one. Balaam seems to have some kind of supernatural gifting, and he's a guy who's up for hire. Like, you can hire me, and I might be able to bring about your blessings and curses on the world. And so he's on his way to go curse Israel with the powers that he seems to carry in some way, because he's well known in that time. And on his way to do that, he stops and he feels God tell him, you're not going to curse Israel. Instead, I'm going to make you bless them. So this king who's hired Balaam in, he's like, all right, go ahead, curse them. There they are. Do you see how many there are? There's like thousands of them. They're going to overrun us and take us all out. And Balaam gets ready to curse them when God tells him, no, you're going to bless them. And so in front of the king, he blesses Israel instead. And the king's like, whoa, what did you just do that for? That's not what I paid you for. And so the king takes him to another place and shows them more and tells him, all right, curse him this time. He's like, all right, I'm going to curse him. And then God tells him that he has to bless them. So he blesses them again. And the king's like, what is happening? And they do it a 3rd time. It happens all over again. But Balaam, he's not doing this because he wants to. He's doing it because he's been forced into blessing Israel. And so he gives them a strategy. Balaam says, look, all right, we blessed Israel 3 times, I get it, but you can mess them up still. All you got to do is kind of like seduce them. You got to pull them into your clans and teach them to worship your gods, and kind of through a mixture of idolatry and sexual immorality, you'll find a way to really screw up their whole nation, and then the whole thing will just fall apart. And so Balaam becomes the advice of another heretic, someone who's trying to lead people astray until their whole lives are thrown off, and then it's not even following God anymore. Cain is like that to some extent. Balaam is like that. And then we have the sons of Korah, which is not your anime TV show, you nerds. Korah, does anybody remember this story? Another lesser known story in the Bible, until it might come back to you once you hear it. Abraham has been trying to lead Israel, has been teaching them the laws, has been listening to God and trying to relate things onto them, when some other leaders in Israel show up and try to make a little church split, right? All right, Abraham's been doing all this stuff, but we don't really like him. Do the rest of you really like him? Our families don't really like him. Come along, let's talk to each other and see. You know what? I bet we could lead it better. Well, not just us. I bet you could lead it better. Oh, yeah. I probably could if you wanted that. It's like the classic kind of church split mentality. And so they try to overtake Abraham. The sons of Korah come up, and then Abraham listens to God about all of this jabbering and then comes back to the sons of Korah and says, all right, we're going to do a little experiment. He gives them some instructions, and they're all together going to figure out whose side God is on. And as all of Korah and his families and the people sided with him come forward to try to orchestrate this church split, the ground opens up and eats them alive. Does anybody remember this story? Yeah, don't start church splits. Just kidding. That's not a threat. But the story goes on. It says that Sheol ate them alive. The ground opened up, and then the underworld, where people go usually when they die, takes them while they're still living. So you have stories like Enoch, who goes to heaven while he's still alive, and then you have stories of the sons of Korah who go to Sheol while they're still alive. It's an unusual kind of thing. But between these three different stories, Jude is trying to say that this church, their leaders, they're false prophets, they're false teachers, who Jude would not put on everybody, but he has felt strongly to put it here. They're acting like Cain, they're acting like Balaam, they're acting like Korah. Essentially, they are leaders who are taking people astray, who are going the wrong way, and because of that, they're messing everybody else up under them. They're all headed straight to Sheol alive. They're all headed right into sensuality and idolatry. They're all headed toward deciding that their way of justice is better. The ways of Cain, Balaam, and Korah continue on in these leaders. Now he goes on. He goes on to say some more analogies because he's just got a lot to say toward these leaders. He says, these are hidden reefs at your love feasts, as they feast with you without fear. Shepherds feeding themselves. So first off, they're reefs. That's a water analogy. When you're in a boat, hidden reefs can be very scary. You don't necessarily see them coming, and then all of a sudden you scratch across them. But even if it's not hidden, if you hit any kind of like coral at all, it's going to scratch your boat up pretty good, especially in a time where everything's made of wood. So they're reefs. That's a water analogy. And does anybody know what a love feast is? Love feast is a little... Oh, come on, that was funny. Love feast in Bible times, it was an agape feast. It was a love feast. It was two things at the same time. It was kind of a potluck. People brought food together. Sounds like dinner church. And it was communion at the same time. So you would get together to eat together, and you would also have bread and wine featured in the potluck as a reminder of the Lord's Supper. And so this was something that we even tried to do one time, though we maybe missed the boat a little. We were trying to have cereal and bread and wine juice available every Sunday, but we still split it. But the idea with the original church, the New Testament church, is they would have all the food at the same time, remember what God did for them in a party of sorts. So first off, Paul looks at them and is like, your leaders, they're reefs. They're hidden reefs. You don't realize what kind of damage they're about to do to you. But when you guys get together and you take communion in your love feast, you're doing it irreverently. You're feasting without fear, shepherds feeding themselves. That was a really big deal that people looked around for in the ancient church. Not only in the Bible does it say don't have leaders who are lovers of money and things like that, but in other literature about pastors and whatnot in the ancient world, they said the same thing, like don't get caught up in money. But these pastors, shepherds, are feeding themselves. So they're finding ways to kind of profit and get rich in some way off of their false leadership. So they're hidden reefs, but they're also waterless clouds. In this case, we're up in the sky. Waterless clouds, which is especially a big deal when you live in an area that may not get a lot of rain. You see the clouds coming, you're waiting for the storm, and then it passes over you. And if you're a farmer, you're really bummed. You wanted that rain, but it was a pointless storm. It didn't hit you in the way that you hoped it would. Me and Jericho were at Target the other day, and we looked up in the sky, and it was just dark clouds headed our way. And we both said, it looks like it's going to storm. And so we asked our phone, is it going to storm? And it's like, no storms. It's like, I really wanted that storm. That's kind of the way that he looks at them. They're clouds that bring no water. They're visible, but they're not sharing anything that's helpful to anyone. They're swept along by winds. They're fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead, uprooted. So now we have trees, which is an earth metaphor. And he says they're twice dead, which that's a bit of a judgment statement, right? If you die one time, then you're dealing with the whole heaven and Sheol situation. But if you die a second time, then you're dealing with the hell, the lake of fire that brings an end to all things. And Jude is so strong in his language right here that he's saying, like, they haven't just been judged once in this life. They're already living in judgment in the second life. If they don't turn around, they'll make their way into the first death now, into Sheol, and then in the life to come, they make their way into the lake of fire that extinguishes, the lake that is hell. So they're twice dead already. That's a strong statement for him to be making, but that's what he sees in the way in which they're doing whatever they want. Says they're wild waves of the sea, casting up foam of their own shame. So we got the water again. And they're wandering stars from whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. And in the ancient world, stars would have been not the sky, but the heavens, much higher than that. So he's pulling analogies of different parts of the world to make his point. What are these leaders like? Well, in the water world, they're like reefs. In the sky world, they're like waterless clouds. In the earth world, they're like trees that are twice dead with no fruit. In the heavens, they're like wandering stars. By the way, does anybody know what a wandering star is called in English? Casey? Shooting star? That would make sense. There's a word in English that means wanderer, technically. A little bit of astronomy for you. Okay, planets. Planets means wanderer. And the reason we call planets wanderers is because when you look up at the night sky, everything has a trajectory that can be accounted for every night. But planets, because they're closer to our eyes, they actually do weird things. Sometimes they seem to move backwards because of the way that we're perceiving them. Sometimes they seem to glitter a little differently, and they're not on track in the same way that everything else is on track. Try it like this. You ever turn your windshield wipers on and they're to the beat of the music you're listening to? Yeah? But then within like the next 7 seconds, they're slightly offbeat because if the music was 140 beats per minute, your wipers were 141 beats per minute. Just give it some time and it will sync back up on the next 1/4 note. Music theory, everybody. Here we go. But it's off sync and it's on sync at the same time. Planets were like that. And because in the ancient world, people thought stars were angels, they were heavenly beings, and that was them up there shining, the planets got a bad rap. Because all the stars seem to be following God's will, predictable day by day, night by night, but the planets, they do what they want. And so those must be really stubborn, powerful angels that perhaps are rebelling against God. And so the Old Testament tells a story too, where there was one particular star that decided it wanted to wander into the wrong territory and be even higher than God. And God kicked that star out of the heaven, so shooting stars, like Casey said, They would have this kind of idea that if you saw a shooting star, even though to us that's like a comet or asteroid, for them it might be God kicking something out of heaven down to Sheol, down to the underworld. And that's exactly the way that he describes these people. So just like the angels of old times, the wandering stars, the planets, the ones who are off kilter and not doing the will of God, but doing what they want in the sky, just like they have been sentenced out of the skies and down to Sheol, he says, so these people have, these leaders, to the gloom of utter darkness, that underworld realm in the cosmos. Okay. So there you go. If you wanted to know all the ways in which Jude is insulting these leaders, you now have much more expertise. So if you're looking to come up with an insult for a friend, Jude gives you a good 7 right here. All right. Now let's back up for a second, because I didn't just come here to teach you how to insult people. Again, when we look all this over, we realize that the main problem is that these people are just following Jesus but doing whatever they want. And Jesus had a problem with that. Because Jesus said, some of you will come to me and say, Lord, Lord. In other words, like a double affirmation. Lord, you are my Lord. We cast out demons in your name. We did mighty miracles in your name. We saw healings in your name. And does anyone remember Jesus' response to these people? I don't know your name. Depart from me. I don't know who you are. And that really throws us off. Because when we hear stories like that, we're like, how can we follow Jesus and be so off kilter that we get to the day of judgment and God would be like, oh, who are you? You know my name, but who are you? You didn't follow me. The people Jude is writing to is the example of how we can put Jesus' name on things, how we can prophesy about all kinds of things, how we can do supernatural works, and yet so deeply miss the point that we might incur judgment on ourselves, not just a little bit, but to the full extent. And Jude is trying to save them, these leaders and their followers, from that way of life. Because that's a dangerous place to be. Here's the thing, Jesus, while he frees us from the law, he frees us from a form of the law. It's the one that we call the letter. It's the one that's written down. It's the one that doesn't always take people into account, but is stagnant and straightforward and dry. But a good judge knows how to embody the letter. That stagnant rules become alive in them. I was just at a court case this past week, and I watched the judge try to make decisions. And the judge knows the letter of the law. The judge knows the ways in which he should legally prosecute some things. But his job is not to say, well, I heard someone use this buzzword over there, and therefore I found that buzzword in the law, and now I'm taking what's written right here and applying it to this scenario exactly as I see it together. The judge's job is to say, I'm listening to your case, I'm listening to the attorneys, the lawyers, I'm listening to the testimonies, I'm seeing your heart in the midst of it, and I'm trying to make a good call based on that letter being inside of me. And so the case that I was at, I had one side of the attorney trying to terminate some parenting. And then on the other side, I had an attorney trying to get the kids back. And then the judge is listening to all the cases, can hear how both sides could ring true, but ends up in this space of saying, we need more time to figure this out. It is clear that the parents love their children, but at the same time, it's also clear that something needs to happen to bring about safety in this situation. The judge is embodying the law in that moment. And so often Christians read the law, the Old Testament, and they just apply it heartlessly and soullessly. Well, this is what the law says, and this is the way in which we need to live, and then we start holding people up to really ancient law codes, some of which are very clearly not provably damaging to people in ways that are not just. And that's what Jesus came to fix. You no longer live by the letter, but you live by the embodiment of the letter, who is who? Jesus. I know, the answer at church is always Jesus. In this case, it was. Jesus says, I am the fulfillment of the law. And so, when Jude comes across a church that says, no law, do whatever you want, free morality, there's no such thing as morality, go crazy, throw the letter out entirely, don't even worry about it. Jude is coming along and trying to reset their minds. Guys, morality still exists. The law still exists. But it's now a living, breathing judge. It's a person who embodies the law. So when Jesus comes and says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, and sets out a politics, sets out a law, sets out a way of thinking, you don't get to argue with that. You don't get to say, no, Jesus, it's actually not, though. I'm going to do what I want. No, Jesus is the law. And because he's living and breathing as you are praying, the Holy Spirit will come and write God's laws on your heart. That was prophesied for us. So when you're stuck in a situation and you're trying to figure out, Jesus, how can I most be obedient to follow you right here? That's a time of prayer to say, what is the law in which it would be performed through you, through me right now? And you will find within the answer that Jesus gives you that it will line up with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Because that is what the law is supposed to do. It will line up with justice, because without law there is no justice. It will line up with Jesus. And that's all a part of the reason that Jesus lived for 30 years. That's all a part of the reason that Jesus had us write 4 Gospels. Because God thought it was so important for you to understand what a human looks like when they follow God's laws, that you needed an example. Jesus wasn't just sent and then as a baby was crucified. Jesus was sent to live so you could see what a person following the law looks like, so that you could do it too. And sometimes that's confusing, because I don't know if you noticed, but Jesus undoes a few of the laws that are written in the letter. And then as the judge, he does the opposite side. Well, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Someone hurts you, you hurt them back. But me, as the real judge, as the embodiment of the law, I want you to know we've all missed the point there. Actually, instead, love your enemies. That's justice. That's righteousness. That's the politics of the kingdom of heaven. That will put things right. So today, when we come to a very strong statement from Jude with 7 or 8 very strong illustrations to make them aware that they are not following God, but they are following false leaders who are following their own hearts, who are getting away with immorality, sensuality, and all these things. That's something for us to remember. Where are the spaces where we're following our own hearts in places where it's not following Jesus? That was something that he was clear with me about last week. I mentioned this vaguely. I'll tell it a little more straight. I was praying, And I went to tell God, I feel like I have been disobedient, but the word that came out was, I feel like I have been recalcitrant. And I was like, except I don't know what that means or why I just said it. And so I Googled it, and recalcitrant is like so much more than disobedient. It's like, I feel like I have been eagerly going the other way and disrespecting authority is more or less what it means. And I was like, I guess if you're agreeing with me by putting an even harsher word there, I have some repenting to do on this situation to get myself back in line. Because I don't think I knew recalcitrant was a word. Well, that's a moment for me to say my heart was out of line. I had to fix this. I had to get back on line. I have to follow your laws, your ways, your judgment. Where is it in your life where you feel a little off kilter? It might be a space where you feel like you know, like I did, but I didn't know how strongly. Or it might be a space that you just had no idea of. So we're going to close out with one last song as you pray and ask God what you might do with that. And this final song is one I wrote to try to bring all these themes together as I've puzzled over Jesus as the law over the last years.
He's the fulfillment of law. He's the fulfillment of law. Whatever is right is defined by Christ. He's the fulfillment of law. Jesus, the King of it all. Jesus, the King of it all. In full, not in part, He's the judge of my heart. Jesus is King of it all. I am free of the letter, but not of the King, of the prophet and priest who has justified me. The law is living and breathing as the Spirit song sings, and He convicts me of His laws. He convicts me of it all. May I not depart from your side. May I not depart from your side. May lawlessness not be found where mighty works do abound. May I not depart from your side. I am free of the letter, but not of the King, of the prophet and priest who has justified me. The law is living and breathing as the Spirit song sings, and He convicts me of His laws. Oh, He convicts me of it all. Jesus, are you still my King? If for you I do not do a thing, if I live how I want and your laws are for naught, Jesus, are you still my King? I am free of the letter, but not of the King, of the prophet and priest who has justified me. The law is living and breathing as the Spirit song sings, and He convicts